Are witchcraft and paganism religions? This is a very interesting question that a lot of newer practitioners have, and even folks on the outside of the community will ask this because it seems as though paganism is its own unique religion. And today let's talk about that and let's delve a little bit deeper into it, because understanding where those words came from and why we use them today can really help you understand the history of witchcraft, which is something I firmly believe every practitioner should have a really firm grasp on before you start practicing. But since I'm not in a coven and you are not my coven mates, whatever, what I've discovered here is through my own research. I spent more than a few hours this last week trying to delve into it, trying to come up with some concrete answers about paganism and witchcraft being religions. And so that, like I said, was a very, very murky answer. And so I want to give you three things to consider when looking at paganism and witchcraft as religions. The first is the history of those two words, paganism and witchcraft, because witchcraft is actually a much older word than paganism. Witchcraft, its first known incidence was in around 961 BC, and can be found in the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel specifically in the Bible, when Saul consults with the witch of Endor to try to conjure the spirit of Samuel to help him win a war. And the spirits tell him that he is going to die in battle and his sons are going to die, and it's just very bleak. And so in the Old Testament is the first known usage of the word witch and witchcraft. And so I found that particularly interesting, especially for individuals who are coming out of Christianity who want to just get away from it part and parcel and just have absolutely nothing to do with Christianity whatsoever, is the fact that we owe Christianity, I want to see how many times I can say that word, we owe Christianity a huge debt for coming up with that word that we use to identify ourselves today. And beyond that, the term witch wasn't really used much until around the 6th or 7th century. Oh, I was taught AD. I know it's something new. Anyway, around the 600 to 700 AD. And, you know, it kind of bopped around, but it wasn't really used all that much until around the 1500s to the 1600s, when the Malleus Maleficarum was published by the Catholic Church. Now, the Malleus Maleficarum is the witch's hammer. It is a handbook that, one, teaches people how to identify witches, but two, also really gets into some very interesting philosophy about witchcraft, because witchcraft in the Church's mind, capital C Church, capital C Catholic Church, is basically devil worship. You work with the devil to get your power. And so for them, witchcraft was intrinsically evil. And you know, you still get that opinion today, but back then, I mean, they were drowning people, they were hanging people, they were burning people, they were crushing people, they were just finding all of these really new and inventive ways to try to get rid of the blight of witchcraft. And at that point, we all know about the Salem witch trials, of which my ancestors actually participated because they were ministers, yay. But it wasn't until around 1954, 1960s, where the term witch and witchcraft was used in a less pejorative or offensive way. And so witchcraft and witch as a term is actually fairly new in its application to our community. Up until, like I said, the 1950s and 60s, there wasn't really witchcraft. There was paganism, but speaking for myself, I'm a Catholic root worker. I don't identify as a witch, because I actually find the term witch to be offensive because of how it has been used to persecute our community over the last, millennia. And so, like I said, in recent years, that's when folks say, well, I'm a witch, I practice witchcraft, etc., etc., and that is due in large part to Gerald Gardner, who was the founder of Wicca. He published his first books, old book of magic, I believe in 1954. That is largely the date that it... I'm struggling today, guys. That is largely the year that most scholars agree that witchcraft and Wicca started. And he, I have my own opinions of Gerald Gardner. I think he was a creepy old man who just liked to look at people naked, or who liked to look at naked people. We'll get rid of the misplaced modifier there. But he honestly can be credited with taking witchcraft mainstream, because his work, he laid the groundwork for the modern pagan movement. And so while I do have some disagreements, while I have more than a few disagreements with his philosophies and his appropriation of other religions and cultures, and just his general arrogant colonial imperialistic attitude, he really can be credited with starting modern witchcraft, because up until he started writing, witchcraft was still used as a pejorative. And the last anti-witch laws were dropped off of the books in England in the 20th century, less than 100 years ago. And so witch has a very interesting terminology, it has a very interesting context behind it. And so witchcraft and witch, in and of itself, does not necessarily describe religion. Nowadays, it describes spiritual practices, so spiritual experiences which are individual to the person. And, there's still a lot of pejorative connotation behind it. For example, my parents found out that I'm a practicing root worker, and they don't understand that difference. They just call me a witch, which is fine. But for them, that's a huge problem. And so that's part of the reason why I suck my teeth and click my tongue at people who say, well, I'm a witch, because one, it still carries with it a lot of negative meaning, and two, it really wipes away this amazing history that we have. Like I said, I'm a root worker and conjure worker, and those are both branches of American folk magic. If you go and ask a bruja if they're a witch, they will probably get very, very offended, because witch connotates a poisoner, it connotates somebody who harms people, it connotates a worshipper of the Christian devil, which I am friends with many demonolators and goetic practitioners, and they're just amazing. So I love the darker side of stuff, obviously, but that's neither here nor there. And so if you really want to find your path in witchcraft, then look beyond witchcraft. Look for folk traditions in a specific geographic area. For example, cunning folk were very popular in Europe. I have cunning folk in my family history, funny enough, because part of my family originates in Czechoslovakia. And so, at the end of the day, witch and witchcraft can be used to more as an umbrella term for a spiritual practice. They're not necessarily connotative of a religion. And so now that I have thoroughly beat the witchcraft horse to death, let's look at paganism, because paganism is the huge umbrella term that is arguably bigger than witchcraft, because it encompasses a lot of the pre-Christian belief systems, actually a lot of the pre-Christian pantheons. And so when somebody says, oh, I'm a Hellenistic, I worship the Hellenistic pantheon, and I'm a witch, or I'm a witch who worships the Hellenistic pantheon, that really, if you are going to worship a specific pantheon, you're not a witch anymore. You're a devotee, you're a follower of a religion, actually. And, a lot of people get very hand-shy of that terminology. A lot of people are very hand-shy of the term religion and religious, because they come from Christianity. I come from Christianity. I'm Catholic. And so religious trauma forces people to look at that and say, I want no part of it. It is not a religion. But that is something that is just not true, at least academically, is that paganism is technically a religion. Now, there are many different factions within paganism. It's like Protestantism or Catholicism or even Islam, where there are different sects and denominations, etc., but paganism is a huge umbrella term for a religion. And so, if you are struggling with your Christian background, or if you struggle with the idea of paganism being a religion, please, I really hope that you sit down and just think that through, because it's not necessarily a bad thing, but at the same time, I'm an academic, and I firmly advocate for people staying true to the academic connotations of things, because academia is supposed to be objective. It's supposed to be on the forefront of everything. And so, long story short, I'm a skeptical mystic. Please examine your own biases and try to work through some of that stuff if you're struggling with it, which I know that's hard. But I'm on your side. You can do it. Okay, going back to paganism, because I get sucked down bunny trails really easily. So paganism actually originated between the 4th and 5th centuries AD, so it's actually a fairly new term, and it translates into country or countryside, and so it was actually used by early Christians as a pejorative against the old religions. It basically meant that they were bumpkins, because they came from the countryside. They were peasants who lacked culture and education, because only educated people were Christians. But be that as it may, that term kind of bounced around for, the entirety of the Middle Ages until the present. And during that time period, during the Middle Ages, during the Renaissance, basically from its inception to now, it was used to largely describe any non-Christian belief system. And so in some Christian writings, you will actually see Muslims and Islam referred to as pagan, because they're worshipping a pagan god, Allah. But if you talk to Christians, they'll say, well, Islam isn't necessarily a pagan belief. If you talk to pagans, they will say, well, Islam isn't necessarily a pagan belief. And so the important thing to remember herein is that pagan is also a Christian term. And so the two biggest terms that we have in witchcraft and magic and all of that come from Christianity. Because if you go back to ancient Greece and you ask, one of the Vestal virgins, are you a witch? They would probably be very offended about that. They are not sorcerers, they're not witches, they were under the protection of Vesta. Yes, I haven't studied the Hellenistic pantheon nearly as much as I should have at this point, but there you go. And so that is really something that we should and hopefully will be mindful of going forward, is that Christianity gave us these terms. And that's not a bad thing. But at the same time, we have to look back to the old religions, to Norse paganism, which that's a whole different can of worms, to the Hellenistic pantheon, to the Roman, Egyptian, Slavic, etc., Thracian pantheons, and understand that they are not pagan in the Christian sense. That these were belief systems that predate Christianity. And so if you are a worshiper of the Hellenistic pantheon, Norse paganism, whatever, understand that you are not necessarily a witch. And I understand, I probably just have offended a bunch of people at this point, but at the end of the day, witch is a term that is growing and changing. But if you worship a specific pantheon, you're not a witch. You are a devotee or a follower of that pantheon. You are a religious follower of Diana, of Aphrodite, of Set, of insert deity here. And so, at the end of the day, what I hope everyone takes from this is that, number one, this is just my opinion, backed by academic research, You don't have to do anything I say. This is just, food for thought. Take it as you will. That our modern roots are still very Christianized. And, that's because the Catholic capital C Church ruled for 1500 years and was very, very good at erasing a lot of our history. And so just bear that in mind the next time a Christian comes for you or anything like that. And then also understand that religion and spirituality bring meaning to a lot of people. And so I have my own struggles with the dogmas of the church and with Christians generally. But I have also met a lot of really amazing Christians who do try to emulate Christ and be Christ-like. And so while we are building our own paths and getting into our own practices, just understand that we are more interconnected than you might think. And even a brief survey of history will demonstrate that. So, all things being equal, just remember that witchcraft was a pejorative that came out of the Old Testament in the book of Samuel, 1 Samuel if memory serves. Paganism originated around the 4th century AD, and so we owe a lot to the church for our heritage. And that's not a bad thing. But I hope this has all been helpful. Having these labels, understanding these huge umbrella labels, can help better define and drill down on what you want to study in the long term. So, like I said, I hope this helps. I really appreciate you spending some time with me today. And as always, I'm the head librarian, and I hope to see you again soon.